This is an informal gathering today. This is Bushmaster time, so I'm really excited. The price of your ticket here today, you can't buy this ticket. You have to be a Bushmaster. So this is just us, and I tell you, this is my 5th operational squad. And while the other ones were good, and some were better than others, this is the first squadron I've ever belonged to where I actually felt like a family. I felt like that was true. Even though sometimes people highlighted that, never like they do here. And as you'll find out a little bit later, this was part of our DNA. It goes way back. But I want to read you something from another Bushmaster who did well for himself. General Mark Welsh, who is, as you know, the Chief of Staff. When he took over his letter to Airmen last year, I guess, he was talking about his father, who was a combat pilot of Jerry's generation, decorated in World War II in Korea. And he said, my dad, who was the greatest patriot, officer, and leader I've ever known, taught me that no rank or title would ever be as important as the unit patch I wore. So if you doubted it when I said it, you can take it from the boss. 78th is a special squadron, and I think you'll get some of that feeling today from Jerry. When I met Jerry last spring, he gave me a whole new appreciation for heritage and a new way to look at service. My service, his service, all those who served between, and all of yours as well. So this is really exciting for me. This is a great opportunity for you guys to learn firsthand about the greatest generation and some of the incredible things that happened, specifically in the Pacific Theater, and where the 78th had an important role. As Jerry will tell you, the 78th was the go-to squadron, and I would argue that we're that today. So, with no further ado, we're super fortunate to have, we wear the patch now, and we're super fortunate to have Jerry, who wore the patch long before we were born, to teach us a little something about our heritage. So, ladies and gentlemen, Capt Jerry Yellin.
With a name like Yellin, I don't really need a microphone. Pearl Harbor came on December 7, 1941, and that was 28 years after the end of World War I. And I, as a young man growing up in Newark, New Jersey, built every single model of every airplane that was flown by the French and the British and the Canadians and the Germans and the United States. And on Pearl Harbor Day, I was 17 years old. And when that happened, I made up my mind that I was going to become a fighter pilot and I was going to fly fighter planes against the Japanese. So on my 18th birthday, February 15, 1942, I gave the papers that would allow me to become an aviation cadet and waiting to my parents to sign. And they did it reluctantly. I was insistent. You had to have 2 years of college or pass an equivalent exam in order to become an aviation cadet, regulations in those days. So I took the exam, I passed the mental exam, but I flunked the physical. I had 20/30 vision in one eye, and the doctor who examined me said, go home and stay in a dark room, eat a lot of carrots, don't read anything, and come back and take the exam again. That wasn't good enough for me. My mother was on the draft board. I said, Mom, I want to see the eye chart. So she brought me the eye chart. And I memorized the eye chart. And I passed the exam. In August of 1942, I was inducted into the Army Air Corps, which is a part of the Signal Corps at Fort Dixon, New Jersey. Went through classification in Nashville, Tennessee. I wound up in Santa Ana, California in pre-flight. And on February 22nd, 1943, 1 week into my 19th year, I soloed in a Stearman. Went to Marana Army Air Base for basic through a Vultee vibrator, and then Luke Field, where I had 10 hours in a P-40. Beginning of August, we took a physical exam. Again, I had already flown 10 hours, been to gunnery school with P-40s, and I flunked the eye test. And there was a Chinese major, Major Lee. He said, you've come so far with your class that we'll let you graduate. We're going to put you in transports. I said, sir, I am not a transport pilot. I'm a fighter pilot. I've already flown a P-40. And he said, not if I have anything to say about it. And I said, well, who can change that? He said, well, the Commandant of Cadets. How do you get to see him? Go through a chain of command. What does that mean? Ask me first. Sir, I want to see the Commandant of Cadets. Next thing you know, I'm in front of a 12-foot chicken colonel, sitting at a desk, big guy. He says, what can I do for you, Yellin? He said, sir, I said, I'm a fighter pilot, but they want to put me in transports because of 20/30 vision in one eye. And he said, anybody that's got the B's to come to see me, you're a fighter pilot. So the last 28 guys in the alphabet, from the R's to the S's to the T's, the U's, the V's, the Y's, and the Z's, were sent to Hawaii to Dogpatch, which was where the 78th Bushmaster pilots were flying P-40s. And we were going to get 50 hours in a P-40 and then be shipped out into other squadrons that were starting to go from atoll to atoll, Eniwetok and Kwajalein, and take the atolls back from the Japanese. But 5 of us were kept in the 78th Fighter Squadron. John Patterson from Honolulu, Al Sharon from Waterloo, Iowa, Bob Ruby and Bob Roseberry, one from Cedar Rapids, one from Cedar Falls, and me. And when I was with these 3 guys from Iowa, because I hated the word Iowa, it wasn't a place, it was a test I had to take in school every year, grammar school, high school. I took the Iowa skill test. But they kept us. And the first rule of the 78th Fighter Squadron in October 1943 is that there are no rank in the officers' club. We had not a Quonset hut, but a big shack. And you had to buy a gook shirt. A gook shirt is a native Hawaiian shirt. Couldn't wear your uniform into the officers' club. So that Major Carney and Major Sutherland, with Major Sutherland, it was first name, Bob, it was Jerry, rookie Yardbird, flying P-40s. That was the beginning of my relationship with the 78th Fighter Squadron. We flew off a dirt strip in Haleiwa, off of Haleiwa. And then we moved into the golf course at Stanley Field, which were 2 fairways of the Schofield Barrack golf course. And on March 10, 1945, and by the way, the 78th was a part of the 7th Air Force, 15th Fighter Group, and the 45th and the 47th. There were 3 other, there were 9 squadrons in the 7th Air Force flying P-40s. And the 78th was the go-to squadron, the absolute go-to squadron for anything unusual that was going to happen. And Jim Tapp, who was then a captain, who was the only guy that I knew who could do an outside octagonal flight in a P-40, stand on its wing, he could do anything. Make the airplane talk, was the go-to pilot, and he was my personal mentor. On March 10th, 1945, I was flying a P-40 on a gunnery mission. There was a P-40 towing a target, flat target, and had to go upside down to get into position to fire your guns at a 90-degree angle and pull away without hitting the target, without hitting the tow line. And I turned it upside down at 8,000 feet. There was water in a drip pan. I had a runaway propeller. The engine froze. And nobody had ever talked to me about getting out of an airplane. But I was a pretty smart guy, and I did a lot of hangar flying. What would I ever do if I got into trouble? And I figured out that if I got into trouble and I had to bail out, I would get my straps off, I would get the canopy back, I'd trim it nose down, turn it upside down, and pop the stick, and I'd get sucked out. You want to know something? It worked. Because I'm here. It worked. But I spent 9 hours in a one-man life raft because of the weather, and they had to come all the way around from Honolulu with a crash boat. It took them 9 hours before I got back to land. I got a shot of liquor, medicinal alcohol, from Doc Lewis. They put me to sleep at 6 o'clock in the morning. They're waking me up. You have to fly. I'm not going to fly. You have to fly. Jim Tapp himself grabbed me, brought me down into his airplane. He had a guy from Puerto Rico who was the best mechanic in the whole world working on his airplane. And he had the best airplane. He put me in his airplane, and it wouldn't start. So he came up and said, what's wrong? He said, it won't start. Turned on the mag switch. Started, smelled fumes. Take off. No, take off. Yes, sir. I took off and I flew, or I wouldn't be here flying if they hadn't done that. A few weeks later, he calls me down to the flight line. I'm not talking about me now, I'm talking about the Bushmaster. We, of the 15th Fighter Group, were going to get a C-47 so that we could go fly to Hawaii, the Big Island, get fruits and vegetables and do shopping and that kind of stuff for the squadron, for the group. So I'm sitting next to in a Jeep, and he's driving the Jeep. He's never been in a twin-engine airplane. I've never been in flown, and I'm reading the PIF, how to start it, what to do, all of the stuff that the manufacturer put in the pilot's information file. And then we brought that back. A few weeks later, he called me to the flight line. And he says, Yellin, get on my wing and don't get off. If you do, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. So I got on his wing, and we did everything that you could possibly do in close formation over a destroyer. When we got back to land, landed at Stanley Field, he said, you know where you were? I said, yeah, I was on your wing. He said, we just did an air show for President Roosevelt, who's coming to meet with MacArthur and Admiral King and Nimitz and all of these guys to plan the rest of the war in the Pacific. That's the kind of guy that Jim Tapp was. Well, we got P-47s, and we were supposed to go to Truk. Truk was an island that was going to precede the invasion of the Philippines. But Admiral Mark Michener had a fleet of 3 aircraft carriers. In September 1944, he shot down, or his fleet shot down 12 or 1,400 Japanese airplanes. So MacArthur decided he's going to bypass Truk and went to the Philippines instead of that. So our mission was called off. We had already had a Bushmaster venom juice party. I went to the Coca-Cola plant in Honolulu, and I got empty syrup drums. They were about this big wooden kegs with a wooden plug. And we got Doc Lewis to provide medicinal alcohol. We put in coconuts, we put in pineapples, we put in, and we let it ferment until it sizzled. You know, just sizzled. And we had a few drinks. Al Sharon had 1, 2, 3 drinks. He keeled over and fell asleep. Tapp was going around cutting everybody's hair off. We were going into combat. And the next morning, you couldn't get into a tree. There was no way. I mean, it all went right through us. And the disappointing thing is that they called off our mission. But then we were at Bellows Field from Mokalia, and we got P-51. In December of 1945, we flew our P-51s to Ford Island, where they landed. When we landed there, they took our airplanes and loaded us onto the Sitco Bay, which was a Jeep carrier. There were airplanes below deck and airplanes on the deck, and we had to figure out a way, if we were attacked, because we were all alone, unescorted, to take all of the 51s off of the deck and get the ones from below and take off from the carrier and never be able to land on them. On the carrier, we'd bail out if we could find the carrier if we were attacked. So they had to have one guy fly and see if he could take a P-51 off a carrier. Who did they choose? Jim Tapp. So Jim Tapp goes out, he gets on the carrier, it was P-51, they put it on in the harbor, didn't land it, put it on, it went out to sea, they get going fast. They gave him all the signals that they had to get. They give him a crank, he gives him a crank. They give him a hold, he holds onto the throttle. They put their hand like this, he puts his hand like this guy goes like that. He puts his hand and locks his hand here, and they shoot him. Now, he's telling the story afterwards. He said, I'm going right into the sea. They're shooting me right into the sea, and he was pissed, really angry at them. But he didn't realize that they shot him in timing with when the carrier's deck would start up on the wave, and they'd go up in the air. So he told that story. We were hysterical. About 3 days out to sea, we went into a briefing room filled like this in the briefing room, and we saw a relief map of a small 8-square-mile island called Iwo Jima. Now, Iwo Jima was 700 miles from Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, where since November the B-29s had been bombing Japan, losing 40% of their airplanes to mechanical failure, to weather, not necessarily to the Japanese. And they needed some place for fighter planes, 700 miles from the Tokyo shore, from the Japanese shore. And we were the first ones that were going to be on that island of Iwo Jima. On February 19th, 67,000 Marines invaded an island, 8 square miles of land, that had 23,000 Japanese defenders on the island. 90,000 people fighting on 8 square miles of land. On March 6th, they had enough land that the 45th, one of the 15th fighter plane group went down, and I landed with the 78th and the 47th on March 7th, 1945. I remember we would buzz the field in 4-ship formation, pitch out, get our gear down like half loop, do wheel landings, give the throttle to get down to the end of the runway. And there was a follow me Jeep, and I followed that follow me Jeep, and I saw mounds and mounds and mounds of Japanese bodies being pushed in to mass graves. And the smell and the sight was overwhelming. And then I saw the Marine mortuary not far away, and there were truckloads of American bodies in the back of these huge trucks, laid out on the ground for identifying, and before they were buried in the 5th Marine, 7th Marine cemetery. On March 8th or 9th, we took off, we got our gear up, we went down, we strafed for the Marines. They had yellow flares, they had yellow smoke, they had yellow lines. One side was Japanese, one side was America. And foot by foot by foot, we helped them. We dropped napalm into caves. They lit the napalm with flamethrowers. And we saw all of that from the air. And then on April 6th, we were called into a briefing about the first long-range mission to be flown over Japan by land-based airplanes. And I was on that mission. This picture was taken, that picture was taken on Iwo Jima. I'm in the center, but I wanted to point out something. I'd like to leave that picture up if it's possible, because I'd like to talk about that a little bit later. So on April 7th, 16 of us, we had actually had 18 or 20 go up, a couple of them for reserves.
So we're done with
And 16 of us wound up over Tokyo, and one guy wound up going to Osaka. Now, I was in Reading this year at the Reading Air Show, and there was a guy there in the dining room that I sat next to for breakfast, and I was wearing this uniform, and he was wearing a blue sports jacket, and I said, "What are you doing here, sir?" And he looked at me, he said, "I'm doing here the same thing that you're doing." Talking about my wartime experiences, he says, I was the wing commander of 550 B-29s that flew over the Missouri on September 2nd when they signed the treaty. I said, "Gee, that's interesting. I was a P-51 pilot on Iwo Jima, and I escorted B-29s. He said, "I've been waiting for 70 years to find a guy who flew P-51s from Iwo Jima to tell him this story." I was bombing Osaka in April, and I look out the window, and he's as excited as I'm trying to get inside. And I look out the window, and there's a P-51 cycling up to me. He's coming in, and I got in touch with him, and I pulled him back to Iwo Jima. I said, "Let me show you his picture." He says, "Are you crazy?" I said, "No, his name was Chuck Heil. Chuck Heil was the last guy on the left of that picture. He got lost on the way up and picked up a bunch of B-29s that went to Osaka. This guy's name was Bob Beauchers from New Jersey, Springfield, New Jersey. He's 93 years old, and I gave him the thrill of his life by telling him this story. How many times do you think you'll meet somebody that you did something 70 years, some odd years ago, and then pull out a picture? That's crazy, absolutely crazy. Well, on April 7th, 1945, Jim Taft shot down 4 Zeros. We lost nobody on that day. On April 12th, he shot down his 5th and became the first ace, land-based ace in the war over Japan. He had a wingman who I trained in E-flight by the name of Fred White, 50% Indian, American Indian, 50% Caucasian. Fred White was flying so close. We were the best. He was so close when TAP was shooting down these airplanes that he ingested some of the shells, and it damaged the coolant line, and he was leaking coolant, and TAP flew him to a submarine. And Fred White bailed out, and his chute never opened. TAP followed him down into the drain. He was the first of the casualties that we had. I led an 8-ship string formation against Chichiji. And they were shooting at me. They hit my wingman, Dick Strobel, from New Jersey. He bailed out, landed on Chichijima, took his clothes off, got into the sea, got his one-man life raft out. I called for help. They came with a B-17, dropped a 12-man lifeboat. He got into the lifeboat, and then a PBY landed, an airplane like Scoop used to fly. That's how he got his name, Scoop, scooping up the water. That's what he told me. They wanted to call him Dumper, but it wasn't. Didn't sound too good. And Strobel was dead. And the squadron that I called in away from a mission going to Japan had rockets, and they were ordered to sink that boat with rockets. On May 30th, I shot down at 0. My wingman, Danny Mathis, from North Augusta, South Carolina, his bullets were hitting it. We had to focus our gun cameras on a pip of a cloud, and I always used the top of Mount Fuji, the peak of Mount Fuji, the symbol of Japan, because we always could see that as my pip. And he and I shared a kill, but I had a toothache, and I went to Doc Lipschitz, who was our group dentist. He pulled 4 wisdom teeth, and I was grounded. You might have seen a picture in front of me, with me in front of the Dory-R, briefing a guy. That guy is Danny Mathis, going to fly in my airplane on a mission, escorting B-29s. An hour after the picture was taken, the squadron took off. An hour after they took off, a Yardbird second lieutenant, aircraft commander of B-29 navigation plane, led the squadron, the group, into a storm from the deck to about 40,000 feet, and 27 fighter planes went down in a mid-air collision. 27 fighter planes. Hap Arnold flew out himself, the chief of staff of the Air Force, flew out to investigate it. And he there, when he came, pinned the distinguished flag, the distinguished service cross on Jim Tapp's chest. But 27 guys were killed, including Danny Mathis and Jack Nelson from the 78th Fighter Squadron. We're going to honor them today, along with the other guys. April turned into May, turned into June. They stopped flying daylight B-29 mission. Curtis LeMay was a general of the Air Force in Europe. The war by April or June of 1944, 1945 was pretty much where they wanted it to be. In June of 44, they stopped flying daylight missions with the B-29. So we went up on strafing missions. We went up 8 hours, 4 hours up, 3.5, 4 hours up. We needed 90 gallons of fuel to get back to Iwo Jima. We could cut it down to 20 or 22 gallons an hour. So 90 gallons was the minimum that we could use. And on April 13th, after they dropped 2 atomic bombs, 6th on Hiroshima, the 9th on Nagasaki, we thought the war was over. We went to a briefing in a tent in a Quonset hut on Iwo Jima, and we were told by TAP that we had to go on a mission. That probably they're going to broadcast the code word Ohio. They've got B-17s up, they've got Dumbos up, they've got destroyers, their submarines, all tuned into our channel, our emergency channel, the D channel. They're going to broadcast the code word Ohio. And my wingman, the third guy from the right, 1, 2, 3, the guy with the hat cap on, Phil Schlomberg, was 19 years old. He leaned over to me and he said, "Captain, if we go, I'm not coming back." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "It's something that I feel. If I go, I'm not coming back." So I went to Jim Tapp and I said, "Jim, this is what Phil Schlomberg told me." He said, "Well, if he'll agree to go see Doc Lewis, our flight surgeon, and tell him that he doesn't want to fly, Lewis can stop him, but he has to agree to do that. So I told Phil what Jim Tapp told me, and he said, no way. August 14th, the morning before takeoff, I put my hands like this. I said, you become glue. You just stick on my wing. We're going to broadcast the code word Ohio. We're going to abort the mission. We'll never get to the target. Well, we got up to Kita Point, which is a small island off of Tokyo. Nobody had heard the code word Ohio. We dropped our wings tanks. We went in, strafing airfields around Tokyo. Somebody calls in 90 gallons. I'm leading a flight of 4 airplanes. Phil's my wingman. Somebody in the squadron calls 90 gallons. I lead my flight out, giving him a thumbs up. He's tucked in tight. I went into some clouds. When I came out of the clouds, he was gone. Nobody heard anything. Nobody saw anything. It had to be over the water because the Japanese truly were meticulous about keeping records of who was in the airplanes that they found. They never found anything. When we got back on Iwo Jima on August 14, 1945, we found out that while we were strafing, the war had been over for 3 hours. Nobody broadcast the code word Ohio. That was the last mission flown in World War II. The purity of purpose of my life from 1941 until 1945, when the war was over, was what the pure purpose of war is to kill your enemy. And I did it gleefully. I did it happily. I did it with willingness and with panache. It was everything. I watched on April 7th a big square of fire become an incredible square of fire. First they made a big outline, and then all 150 bombers came in and dropped their bombs. Not once did it ever occur to me that there were people on the ground. Ever. They weren't human beings, they weren't people. I saw American Marines with their penises cut off and stuffed into their mouths, with their faces bashed in to get the gold out of the teeth. I saw the most atrocious things that you could possibly imagine. And 16 guys that were killed. I never thought of them as dead. I only thought of them as being transferred. If I thought they were killed, I started to think about it, I would never have been able to fly a mission again. So I didn't think about it. Then I came home. And what I did when I came home, I had Phil Schlomberg's emblem from his hat, I had his wings, and I had a second lieutenant badge. And I went to Brooklyn, New York, to his house. He had 5 sisters. I didn't know he had a brother. The 5 sisters wanted to see me, and I went there. The mother didn't want to see me. The father was gone. And I told them all about Phil Schlomberg, about our war, about the purity of purpose that we had, about what kind of a man he was, what kind of a wingman, what kind of a pilot, what kind of a guy. And when I was leaving, the mother looked me in the eye and she said, Captain, it should have been you who were killed, not my son Philip. I hope you never sleep a night in your life like I can't sleep. I stood and sat on their stoop in a small snowstorm for an hour before I could get into my car and drive an hour back to New Jersey. And from that day on, from that night on, for 30 years, I lived with addictive behavior for 30 years. Until July 1975, when I learned transcendental meditation, and that relieved the stress that I was going through. That's part of the story. In 1983, I was sort of an expert. I never worked for 30 years. I gambled on a golf course. My wife thought I was going to work. My in-laws, I moved 17 or 18 times, moved to Israel, moved here, moved there, couldn't hold a job, had nightmares. I spoke to these guys every night. I wondered what it was like to fall out of an airplane, not open up a chute. What was it like when Danny Mathis was killed? What was it like then? I had terrible, terrible, terrible nights for 30 years. And then in 1983, the Mitsui Bank, big conglomerate bank in Japan, asked me to come and speak to them in Japan about investing in American real estate. No way. I'm not going to Japan. They're not people. That's not a place I want to visit. I told my wife, Yellin, we got married in October 1949. And she's not well. She's got dementia and Alzheimer's. She's losing it now. If she lasts until October 22nd, this year we'll celebrate our 65th wedding anniversary. And we met on a blind date. I don't know if you know what a blind date is. So when I came home, I told her, I turned down an invitation to go to Japan. She said, you didn't ask me. What do you think happened? We went to Japan. And I fell in love. I gave my lecture, I gave my talk, and I walked on the streets of the Ginza, and I looked up through the buildings, and I saw the B-29s in my mind's eye. I saw them dropping bombs, and the bombs were dropping in me, and I had to get out. You just get out of Tokyo. I went out into the countryside. I went on a train that was, you sat on one side looking at the people on the other side. I had a pretty big mustache in those days, in 1983. I just cut it off on my 90th birthday. I wanted to start over again. So I had a big mustache, a little boy, 3 or 4 years old, sitting across from me. And I looked at him, and he looked away, and he looked at me, and I looked away. Finally, I put my arms out like this, and he jumped off his mother's lap, stood on my lap, and played with my mustache. And the whole car was hysterical. And those were the kind of experiences that I had in Japan in 1983. My youngest of 4 sons was a senior at San Diego State University. And Helene, like a mother, said at the old Miyako Hotel in Kyoto, on the last night that we were going to be in Japan, on that trip, Robert would love Japan. So we came home and I said, Rob, we're going to give you a trip overseas for your graduation. You got a 99% chance of getting it if you go to Japan, and a 1% chance if you go to Europe. I'll go to Japan. So we went to Japan, graduated from college, didn't know what he was going to do. So he took a job in 1984 teaching English for 1 year. And now it's 2014, 30 years later, he hasn't come back yet. 1987, he said, Dad, you and Mom come over to Japan. I'll pay for everything in Japan, you just get here. So I had miles on American Airlines, we went to Japan, and we went there, and he showed us around. And one night we went into a room, a restaurant this big, and there were fish tanks all around. I'd never had sushi or anything like that. He said, Dad, you want to eat some sushi? I says, if you'll eat it, I'll eat it. He says, you're kidding? He said, no. Want to bet? Yeah. How much? $10. Pulls the waiter over. Next thing you know, there's 3 shrimp on my plate, this big, 3 shrimp on his plate. They're squiggling. They're squiggling. And he tears the head off of one, pops it in his mouth. And I look at him and I said, you win. Then he said, Takako and I want to get married. And I saw the faces of the 16 Bushmasters, my buddies, flash through my mind. But it was his life. I was smart enough. I'd been meditating for 7 years. And I was smart enough not to say anything negative. I said, what does her father say? And he said, he won't meet me. He won't meet me. I had a little bit of relief. 7 months later, Takako, who was the youngest of 4 children, 3 older brothers, the father came with two of his oldest sons to meet my son. Now, Robert, at that time, had an afro and a full beard. You couldn't see his face. You could see his eyes. That was it. It's maybe his nose. And he was the antithesis of anything Japanese. And the brothers grilled him about his religion and his education, whether he was going to take their daughter or sister back to America. And he answered the questions. And the father, when he spoke, asked him 5 questions. How old is your father? 63. Was he in the war? Yes. What did he do? He was a pilot. What did he fly? P-51. Where? Over Japan. End the meeting. He went home and told his wife, make the wedding. And she went ballistic. He said, for all of these years, you and I have been talking about how we hate the Americans. What is it that changed your mind? He said, any man who could fly a P-51 against the Japanese and live must be a brave man. And I want the blood of that man to flow through the veins of our grandchildren. So on March 5th, 1988, 2 days shy of 43 years to the day that I landed on Iwo Jima, my youngest son, in Japanese garb, in Japan, married a Japanese woman whose father had 3 hours in a zero, and all of his squadron were assigned to be kamikaze pilots against the Americans, and he and another guy were sent to China to service zeros, and he never fired a gun against the Americans. He resented that. So they got married, and he and I went to a ryokan, Japanese inn in a pool as big as this, maybe bigger, with a translator, and we spoke for 3 hours from our heart, from the bottom of our heart, not from our intellect, but as human beings. We left 3 hours later because we were called late for dinner. They were waiting for us. And he turned to the translator and said in Japanese to Mr. Saida, he said, "You know, I never understood that there were other people in the whole world that felt the same way about religion, about family, about education, other than the Japanese." And that was told to me in English, and I felt the same way about him. Our first grandson, Robert, was very smart. He was making some money. He put all of his children into English-speaking schools teaching Japanese subjects because they didn't look Japanese to the Japanese. They really looked Japanese to me, but not to him. So they learned English and he only spoke English, and Takako only spoke Japanese to the children. They became bilingual. When Kentaro, that's his name of the oldest son, Ken is a Japanese character, and Taro is a Japanese character, put together Kentaro, we call him Ken. When he was about 4 years old, I was in Japan, and I took him with me to the local 7-Eleven. It isn't called 7-Eleven. For me to do some shopping. When I was finished shopping, he looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, buy me a toy." I said, "Ken, I don't have any money." He said, "Grandpa, buy me a book." "Ken, I don't have any money." "Grandpa, buy me some ice cream." "Ken, we're going home." Now, 3 or 4 years later, I'm back. He's not doing his homework. Nobody can get him to do his homework. So I put my arm around his shoulder and I whispered in her ear, 8 or 9 years old. I said, "Ken, if you go inside and you do your homework, I'll take you to the store and I'll buy you a toy." "Show me your money, Grandpa." What kind of a story is that? Well, he just graduated from the MIT of Japan, Hokkaido University, with a master's in physics, and was one of 20,000 applicants for 100 jobs, and he got one of 100 jobs. His brother Simon, 2 years younger, last year graduated from the University of City of London, a 4-year course in philosophy. The last 2 years of the course, on his own, he studied the ancient philosophers' language of Latin so he could read and write Latin. Got an A+ on his thesis and graduated a 4-year course in 3 years and was awarded a master's program scholarship at Oxford University. So he's now at Oxford studying philosophy. And when I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, I invited him to go to Iwo Jima with me, March 2015. He said, "Grandpa, I can't go because I'm going to graduate in 1 year instead of 2 years, and I'm going to go to America and see the 5 top schools of philosophy, Berkeley, University of Chicago, and I'm going to pick out a school where I can get my doctorate in America." So I have discovered through my children that all of us, each and every one of us, have a purpose in life. And it has nothing to do with what we believe. It has everything to what we are, human beings. About 60 years ago, I heard a lecture by Jacques Cousteau. And in that lecture, he said, the planet that we live on is like an airplane. It's held together by rivets. Airplanes are held together by rivets. You can lose 1,000 rivets in an airplane, maybe 10,000, maybe 50,000, maybe 100,000. But there's one rivet. When we lose that, the airplane's going to go down. And we, caretakers of this earth, are caretakers of the rivets that hold the earth together. Worms, birds, fish, animals, plants, everything on this earth is here on this earth to recreate itself. to keep it going, to recreate ourselves. We human beings are also here, no matter what we believe. I know that the sperm of a Jewish guy fertilized the egg of a Japanese lady and gave me 3 grandchildren. Sarah's graduating from high school pretty soon, in the spring. So I know that we as human beings are all the same. I sat in front of 400 young people from Chantilly, Virginia, in the Burke Navy Theater on Memorial Day. Each one of them had a picture of a soldier or sailor or Marine or Coast Guard or Navy guy who was killed in World War II that they were going to carry in a parade in Memorial Day down Constitution Avenue, and I walked in front of them. And I looked at their faces as I'm looking at your faces now. And I'd like to ask you the same questions that I asked them. So the first question is, how many in this audience, and I want you to please stand up, how many in this audience are descendants of the original Native American in this country? How many of you are descendants of them? How many of you are descendants of people who came over here on the Mayflower? Descendants, stay standing, please. How many of you sitting here are descendants of people, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, that came to America to live from another country? Stand up. We are Americans. We are the protectors of the freedom of the world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions? Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for that. This is phase 1, guys. We're going to take about a 27-minute break. 15:30, we're going to have the memorial wreath laying service. So please take a break, stretch your legs, and we'll see you back here 15:30.
I'd like all of you to meet Richard Small, who came in late. Richard Small is the president of the Purple Heart Association of America. He lives here in Las Vegas. He's a dear friend of mine, and he's here to help us with the memorial service. Richard Small.
And Martin, I prayed with you, the 400 students.
Okay, thank you. I did that. Now, the thing that strikes me most of all, and I didn't say it here, is that World War II started in 1941, 23 years after World War I ended. Mm-hmm. And now it's 70 years between what we're doing now. And the technology that has developed from the 70 years from now to then is like day and night. I saw what these guys are doing.
Is it crazy?
No, it's not crazy. I flew the F-35 simulator at Oshkosh this year.
Great.
Who can fly this thing with the buttons and this and the screen and the... I mean, I didn't even know where to find I didn't know where to find the airspeed or the altitude.
Well, luckily you didn't get thrown to a P-51 right out of the chute. You know, you work your way up to it.
But on today's Friday, on Tuesday, I got in the back seat of a Stearman owned by an F-105 fighter guy.
Nice.
And a Delta pilot, retired, 73 years old, Tom Cole. And he said, Jerry, you're going to fly in a Stearman just like you flew as a cadet in the back. I got no radios, got no equipment, nothing. You're going to get in the back. I have to start it, I have to brake it, I have to switch through the mag. And I took the son of a bitch off and I flew it, did some steep turns, and flew for about 30 minutes. He said, okay, we're going back. Do you want to land it? I said, no. And then he told all of the guys that they have a group, they're called the Scorpions. Okay. They fly 4-ship formations in the Stearman, and they won the aerobatic contest last year. Fantastic. And they gave me a hat with a scorpion on it. And they said, that ball never left the center.
There you go. That's where I cut my teeth too. I was a flight instructor in the civilian world. Then I joined the flying side. That's one thing I didn't hear. Those what got you into the flying in the first place?
Well, I made all the model airplanes of World War II.
Okay.
Lindbergh was my hero.
There you go.
General Chenault was my hero. Colonel the Flying Tigers.
You betcha.
And I made my mind up on Pearl Harbor Day, Sunday, that I was going to fly fighters against the Japanese. So that's what happened.
And how old were you then?
I was 18. On my 18th birthday, February 15th, I enlisted. I was inducted into 43H waiting in August of 42. I graduated in August of 43.
Wow.
I soloed on February 22nd, 1943 in a Stearman. I was the first guy to solo in his class because they assigned 5 cadets to an instructor, starting with the A's.
Okay.
And there were 3 guys left over, 1 guy with Y and 2 guys with C. So I got my time in. I got my time in quicker.
Okay.
4 hours and 6 minutes.
That's a heavy beast, so that's great.